Okay. So, yeah, my question today is like, so you once said that right view is to have no view, and
Mm-hmm.
I can really see how that's true and how that leads to less suffering. If I keep investigating in the moment instead of having like a fixed view, and that creates then conflict and tension. And yeah, it's like last week, for example, I had some stress and pressure at work, and then I like I could see that a few times now that if that happens, then most of the time I have for some while a more fixed view and have like a role that I try to play and be a certain kind of way, and this then leads to dukkha. And so my question is how to see that earlier and earlier, and that I'm having fixed view right now. And
All
but
right.
I'm probably I just have to check if there's dukkha, right?
Um, the the idea of finding. Okay, let me start again. The issue that most students need to have the kind of skills that they have been developing in meditation after they deal with the body and the satipatthana in general. That's when we really start working on that fourth and fifth fetter, which is rooted in feeling.
Mhm,
So your question you've already answered. How the question is, how can you see feelings sooner and sooner?
mhm,
And the answer is to that is practice. Keep
mhm,
practicing. Keep a vigil, or keep uh, on guard, and you'll begin to also recognize situations being set up for dukkha to follow. And when you do that, you can just say to yourself, all right, be on guard, dukkha, 5 seconds ahead,
yeah.
because you can see that same get set up. So, what I think that we would gain great benefit out of from the talk today would be what I've been actually spending some time with students, but you and I have already covered this topic, but let's do it again. All right, this is actually underneath those feelings is a layer that is represented in Buddhism by the higher fetters, most specifically the one of mana
Mhm,
or conceit. And that immediately underlying this conceit of I am is, in fact, the self preservation instinct itself.
mhm,
So, conceit or mana or the expression of I am is the primary job of the self preservation instinct when it's not operating correctly.
all right.
When it's operating correctly, then it needs to be there as protection. There are times when the organism needs protection. But in our society, those times are less frequent than they used to be. In fact, as humanity is improving, in the sense of society is getting better, that we're pointing out things that used to be very common are now no longer acceptable. An example would be slavery. We can add racism and all kinds of other stuff. So humanity is marching in a direction that's going to leave us safer and safer in reality as a species. But it doesn't help much in letting us feel safe down at a basic, deep existential level. because we were raised in, as humans growing up, we were raised in a very dangerous society. Most people did not make it to the age of 35, so they say. That instead of having to dodge traffic and climb on elevators, in the old days, we had to dodge rhinoceroses and climb trees. Not as nearly as safe. All right. So that whole mechanism of self-preservation and being on guard for um, dangerous situations, the only real mechanism that that programming has is to raise feelings. All right. That's where the feelings come from. Is it pleasurable? Do we want to pursue this? Or is it unpleasurable and it should be avoided? Now, that basic programming also is polluted with a whole lot of society's ideas of ought, shoulds, woulds, coulds, etc., like this. And so now we're not able, and we're not even taught as a society how to work with and manage feelings, how to train the mind to spot them. And because of that, we operate out of that self preservation instinct through our feelings, and that manifests our behavior. But it manifests itself as if we were still reptiles.
Yeah.
Right, and that's what causes a lot of suffering. All right, that in fact, a lot of the danger that humans have nowadays is manufactured. Okay, one of the ways it is manufactured is in racism or in politics. That in fact, one of the things that I've really come to understand, and the politicians have known it for such a long time, but I can really see it, that all get out to the vote efforts that really work is to terrify the people. If you can terrify them, get them all upset, unhappy, etc., they'll go vote. But if you promise them something good, something nice, a nice new deal, etc., like that, they'll say, "Oh, thank you very much. I hope you get in the office, but I'm not going to bother to vote for you."
Yeah.
And so, in that regard, that's what keeps that mechanism alive, and that all of that part of society that we see from big money, the politicians, big business,
Media.
and all of that supports that idea that we need them and that we're unhappy and unsuccessful without big business. That we're naturally unhappy because they want us to be unhappy, but then they'll promise us something that if we go and do what they want us to do, then we can come out of our suffering. This is the main promise, and naturally it's a big lie, a bait and switch. They have no intention of helping the constituency. Their job is to get elected, get into office so that they can make some money. And that's what politics is all about. However, what I'm pointing out is that that kind of politics really influences the people at a personal, individual level. That if the people would not pay attention to politics at all, not listen to anything that's being said, not look at any advertisement ever, then they will be a whole lot better off. Much happier. Because that all of the advertisements assume that you are in a victim's position, a one-down position, and you need help. And they're there to help you for a price. And that is whether they're selling a drug or a car or a new dress or whatever it is. It's the same old story. You need what they have, and that's their selling point. So if we don't pay attention to any of that stuff, then we don't have that layer that most people who do pay attention to that stuff are there. So now that we're really working down to the level of, through the feelings, down to this level of mana or this level of conceit, we can see that in fact that's the level that is being addressed by industry. by big business.
Yeah.
Is they're attacking that self. Now, the self normally manifests itself in the sense of I am. And in fact, in the Bible, I think it's in Exodus when Moses finally confronts God or the burning bush or whatever and wants to know who he is, the answer is, I am that I am. Okay? It's just a full on expression of ego, and that's all. So I am is the basis for that self preservation instinct. Or let us say that's the voice of the self-preservation instinct is I am, I exist. My job is to continue to exist, and I'll do whatever I need to do, and by the way, a whole lot more than I need to do in order to guarantee that I'm doing my job of preserving this instinct. So the expression is I am, but it almost always has a third word associated in the sense of I am superior, I am good, I am a victim, I hurt, etc., like that. And so there's always an expression, and those expressions then get expressed into the feelings.
Mm-hmm.
So the basic statement I am is expressed in feelings. So if you start looking at feelings and seeing them very clearly and very carefully, you can go down right under that and see that that layer of conceit, that layer of I am. Um, and that one of the things, by the way, that I'll tell you is that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa is really, really big on this.
Mm-hmm.
The Heartwood of the Bow Tree and all kinds of other literature, he talks about this. And that at one time, I was under the impression that he's just talking about basic personality view. He's talking about trying to get everybody over that first hurdle of views of self, especially the doctrines of self that assume that there's something holy and special inside that's going to last a long time.
Yeah.
Well, I kind of get the idea that in Thailand, that's not much of a big issue for the people. And that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa wouldn't need to spend that much time with that. He would also spend time with other things. The reason that he hits on this is because this is the really big issue.
Mm.
That the first fetter is only merely the doctrine of self, and we can get through that through an intellectual understanding. It's basically just seeing it as it is and recognizing it, and that if we have the right tools, then we can go through that without having a dark night of the soul the way Christians would have it, because the Christians, and again, the dark night of the soul, there's a big difference between despair and disgust. That what we really want to cultivate is a disgust for suffering.
Mm-hmm.
But despair is different than disgust. If we become disgusted with things, then we'll just kind of leave it alone. In fact, the word disgust means to breathe out in the sense of throwing it out.
Yeah, throwing out what
Despair,
could be.
despair is something much deeper, and it basically comes from the position of I need help and there is no help.
Mm-hmm.
No help is coming.
Yeah.
All right. And the Christians will have that when one will come to the position that, oh, well, God doesn't talk to me. Therefore, I am in despair.
Yeah.
That's what happened with Mother Teresa. God don't talk to her, and she goes into this dark night of the soul. Why? Because she was absolutely convinced that she does have a soul and that God's job is to
Mm-hmm.
take care of that soul. And she feels untaken care of, and therefore she's doubting God.
She
And
can't help
that's
herself,
putting
right?
right. But the point is that there is no way out of this despair.
Mm-hmm.
There is really no way out. But for Buddhists, it's not much of an issue. because even if there is a way out, we can change that despair into disgust, because the student needs to understand that, wait a minute, you don't need help.
Hmm.
You need to come out of your despair, and you can do that on your own.
Yeah.
Christianity doesn't have that. That
Hmm.
if the Dark Night of the Soul kid in Christianity goes to his teacher, the teacher won't have a good answer. He doesn't say, "Well, never mind, God, just go ahead and get over it."
Hmm.
That's not going to be told to the Christian, because that's against their church doctrine. So now that we've got that out of the way, we can look at this issue of despair, uh, disgust,
Hmm.
in the sense that when we begin to see uh, this conceit, we begin to see it as something really ugly, really messy, and we start to get disgusted with it.
Hmm. And also like
That's
also pretty annoying and unnecessary, right?
Yes, right. It is annoying until you get a really good look at it, and then it goes from the level of annoying into disgusting. And so the even the right expression is, I am disgusted with myself. But we have to make sure that we're following along those pronouns to make sure that we know what we're
Yeah,
talking about. That
yeah,
myself, in
yeah,
that
yeah,
sense, is I'm disgusted with this conceit,
yeah.
and that I want to pull it out, to
Mhm.
stop comparing myself to others. That in fact, that's, I think we talked about this before, about the Adam and Eve story.
Yeah, we talked about the happiness and hunger text, and I think there it is written right about the.
Actually, not quite. The Adam and Eve story that I'm
Okay.
referring to is um, the eating of the fruit of knowledge
Mm-hmm.
of good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm not even sure the word tree is there, because the fruit doesn't come from a tree literally. It's just a metaphor. But eating the fruit is literally having to put up with the consequences of our behavior. We talk about in Pali a lot about path and the fruit of the path. All right, so this is the fruit, but it's the fruit of having knowledge of good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
I'm good, you're evil, or backwards. I'm
Yeah, yeah,
evil
yeah.
and you're good, right? Or I like this and I don't like that. So that whole concept of I like it, I don't like it, that's based in these feelings, just right under them is the issue of conceit. In other words, if it promotes my self identity, then I like it. If it destroys my self identity, then I don't like it. But right under that liking and not liking is this self protection mechanism that expresses itself as I am.
Mm-hmm.
And it expresses itself in a really obvious way, more so for other people than it does for ourselves. It is really hard for us to see conceit in ourselves.
So um, this basically means that I have some view of myself basically, and if there are some situations that challenge this view or could challenge it, then I'm like pulling back and thinking, oh, this situation sucks. I
Hmm.
don't know.
Um, there's another way of looking at it, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that I've run into for myself, and I'll share it with you. And that is, instead of looking at it from the position I like it, I don't like it, I'm looking at it from the position of, when there is criticism, I agree with it or I disagree with it. Now, understanding the quality of the sotapan and really wanting to find suffering and root it out, if someone has criticism for me, I should check it out to see
Mm-hmm.
if their criticism is correct.
Yeah.
If they're correct, if they're right, that this criticism is true, then I owe them a debt of thanks, and I should thank them for it. However, if what they say is not true and I disagree with it, that's when the problem comes. That's when I say, wait a minute, to where in fact, if I were truly at a neutral position, whether I agreed with them or not, I would just merely take it in and just let it be.
Mm.
I could agree with it and not say anything, and I can disagree with it and not say anything. But when conceit comes in, um, the Buddha actually talks about this also in the Sutra number 22, in the simile of the snake, when he's referring to, in fact, this is possibly one of the most important paragraphs in the entire set of sutras. And that's where he starts that even though I have been accused of teaching on the breakup of the body, the annihilation of the self, I don't. I only teach one thing, and that is suffering and no suffering. All right. Now, that first part that I mentioned, that's actually an atheistic position, that there is a self that exists, but that self will break up when the body breaks up. But the Buddha really does not talk about a self and a no self. What he's teaching about is suffering and no suffering. That's the real issue. And so if that self-preservation instinct arises, it arises in the sense that we think that there's a self there because it expresses itself as I am. But really, the reality is nothing but old DNA, perhaps antiquated programming. That's all there is there. So the next part of that one is suffering and no suffering. And then he talks about, though others will revere and praise and say all kinds of good things about my teachings, still I have no elation of heart, no gladdening of the heart on that account. I can have elation of the heart and gladdening of the heart, but I do that with my own mind. I don't get it because I'm getting praise from the outside. And then the next one is those others will revise, criticize, and rebuke me. Still, there is no dejection of heart. No dejection of the heart. And why? Because I have seen all of this before, to deep understanding. Now, the American phrase that I would use would be, been there, done that. Okay? I have been praised before. Why should I want more praise? I've already had it. And I've been reviled before. Why am I having dejection of heart? And you can see that point that when I would say, when someone criticizes and I don't agree with it, then I say, wait a minute, that's a dejection of the heart. I don't like it. And so I can pick that stuff up. I can recognize it. That's why these sutras are so valuable, is because they can point out things to go looking for. So being praised or being criticized, that's when that self-preservation instinct will manifest itself as conceit. And also become aware that conceit then is the source of all of our competition. That we become competitive. For instance, if someone criticizes me and I don't like it, then I will see out of my conceit it is my job to set him straight.
Yeah, and it's also the origin of all the shoulds and guilt and everything, right?
Yes. Well, even if none of that stuff is there, still the conceit I am wants an answer to false criticism. Where the Buddha says, oh no, I've been falsely, vainly accused before, and I can get over it. Let me pull that out. That paragraph is just so powerful. Let me read it to you exactly the way that it comes.
Mhm. Yeah, I get in the suttas. They are really so. Last time you named me a few, and I've read the Relay Chariot Sutta, and yeah, that's they're pretty powerful. I have to spend more time with them.
Yes. Okay. So this is the part that I'll read here. I've already kind of given you a sloppy translation or a sloppy version of it for himself. So the next paragraph is, therefore, bhikkhus, if others abuse, revile, scold, and harass you, on that account you should not entertain any annoyance, bitterness, or dejection of the heart. And if others honor, respect, revere, and venerate you, on that account you should not entertain any delight, joy, or elation of the heart. And if others honor, respect, revere, and venerate you, on that account you should think thus: they perform such services as these for the sake of what has earlier come to be fully understood. Now, this is kind of formal language, but that's what it's getting at is that because I understand the nature of having been fussed at, and I understand the nature of having been praised, and I fully understand it, then I do not have to have a reaction to it. But this is actually directly coming right out of the conceit of I am, that deep better that will that in fact the Buddha, when he was talking about elation of the heart and dejection of the heart, those are actually the feelings that occur when we're being criticized. So now we're looking at not just the feelings themselves of having been criticized, or let us say I like being praised, I don't like being criticized. Now we can look at that underlying issue of that
Yeah.
self-preservation instinct that is in fact operating incorrectly because the programming is so old. The reality is that we're not in any danger at all. But the self-preservation instinct says, oh, danger, 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 danger. He's criticizing us. Oh, we're going to die in 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3, die, Louis.
Yeah, it's just like the software hasn't been updated, right?
Well, actually, that's while that is true, what that really means is that the human mind has not kept up evolutionary to the societies that we're living in. Another way of looking at it is time to grow up.
Yeah.
In the sense of growing out of the old programming into which would be a reptilian kind of programming, into a human programming. So we're actually becoming human. That ordinary people are not human. They still operate instinctually.
Yeah, which kind of makes it hard sometimes, right? To move in society full of full of kids and try to grow up. Because I can really see how I'm getting pulled into certain types of thinking sometimes if I'm around people who behave in those ways.
Mm-hmm. Well, as we've kind of said before, we talked about it in the sense of society. Society and those who have the capabilities of manipulating societies, like big business with their advertisements or making laws in the government, powers that the church has, etc., like that. There is nowhere the intention for the mass group of humans to become happy.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the intention of the society. The intention of the society, if we can say it like this, is for the rich to get richer and the poor to get poorer. That's how society is set up. And the reason it's set up that way is, well, look who set it up.
Yeah, people trapped in delusion, right?
Exactly. So that's part of then the freedom.
Mm-hmm.
So now there's a new perspective of ways of looking at it. We've talked about it before, but now that you're introducing it in the question that you've asked, I'm giving you an answer of right below those feelings is going to be this uh, um, ability to deal with criticism and praise, but that criticism and praise is going to come in 10,000 different ways.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, if you got stock in the stock market and you log on and you see it went up a little bit and you feel good, and it goes down a little bit and you feel bad. And you know intellectually it's going to go up and down. That's what stock markets do. They go up and down and up and down. Why do I have to feel bad? Because I am this money, and I've attached it to my conceit. So one of the best ways of handling that kind of thing is to let it to be somebody else's money. Oh, it's my mom's money. Then, in fact, that was how I was able to manage that rest home for so many years as I did, was because it was mom's rest home, not mine.
Mm.
And she had the same opinion. It's his, it's not hers anymore. And so we're both very happy together. And nobody owns the rest home. So that ownership then is the identification that we place from that conceit that I am. And a really clear example of that would be I am German, or I am Labor Party, or I am Democrat. Okay, that's where we get those identifications. That's why it's so painful when, if we identify with a political party, it gets painful when they win and lose,
Yeah, and
because it's
also,
me that wins and loses.
mhm.
So by not identifying with politics, by not identifying with business, by not identifying with a particular government, only then can we become fully human.
Yeah, and also I also saw like in the last few weeks that even like really like seemingly noble views I have of myself can cause suffering if I like try too hard to be like this or like that.
That's a really excellent segue into the second half of the talk.
Okay.
There is a story that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa tells about the fruit, the gold, and the diamond. Have I told you that story?
Yes, it's about like always changing the pockets, right? With first from fruit, then from to gold and to diamonds.
Yes. So let's look at that diamond, because that's exactly what you were just talking about. And that is that as in most professions, computer science requires that people compete with each other.
Mm-hmm.
That's what getting a pay raise and pay grades and all of that is about. Everything based in business is based in competition. Therefore, it's okay for, as a computer scientist, to gain mastery over his profession. Then he's going to be given the fruits and the benefits of that, and he sees no problem with conceit, because conceit has in fact got him where he is, whether or not that's a good thing or not. And you can see that in sports, you can see it everywhere. And so, in fact, um, through training, one will purify one's skills. And the purification of skill then would be what I'm talking about, is the manufacture of the diamond.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. For instance, rich men do not have an internal strength. That's why they want more money and more money and more money. They're still carrying around that heavy load of gold. But the diamond, that's the one who's built in skill. And that skill can be in karate, it can be in archery, and that in most cases, in fact, I just mentioned archery. If I talk about Zen and the art of archery, that's completely different because now he's actually is looking at conceit. That's why in normal archery, the conceit is always identified by the arrow hitting its target. But within Zen and the art of archery, the target is not the important point. The important point is the shooter, the right form, doing it correctly, letting the arrows fly with the proper form will more or less, the arrow itself will find its target if it's shot correctly. All right. So the Zen can actually leave the field without ever standing there watching to see if the target is hit or not.
Yeah, and
So
I mean, I can really see more and more how like how this is really a root of the problem to always like look for the result, right?
always
Because
looking for the result.
it
Exactly. That's
always gets you out of the moment where the thing actually happens.
exactly because almost always, and even by definition, the results of our labor is going to be off into the future someplace. Okay. But for that Zen archer, all of his work was done by the time the arrow left the bow. And it's going to
Yeah,
be,
yeah.
and sometimes they've got a long field, like 100 yards or something down there, and their targets are really, really small, and so it's going to take 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds for that arrow to get down there. All right, and so the question is, look at the eyes of the Zen bowman to see whether he cares about did he hit the target or not, because that's a point, right? But now we can take that as an education and recognize, oh, look how goal oriented we are. That we're still wanting to have these goals because the goals themselves will then reinforce this conceit that is, in fact, really quite weak. So once you begin to see it directly, you'll start to get disgusted with it because you recognize how much of all of the stuff you've been doing your whole life is in the service of this stupid conceit. This
Yeah.
comparing ourselves to others
Mm-hmm.
and bringing on the competition so that we can get a good idea about how to compare ourselves. Who's the winner here? So this is a way of looking at it. So when you start talking about how to see things quickly, this is the way to do it. As soon as you recognize the feelings are arising, check to see what happened in the mind immediately before that. And there you will find conceit.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, it's always done in the here now, in the moment. You cannot read scriptures and talk yourself into that there is conceit and that I should be disgusted with it. That's not how this works.
Yeah.
No, it's that when you really do see it, you really do become disgusted with it.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you're on guard for it.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, it almost brings a new kind of confusion on. Like, now that I want to avoid being conceited, how do I behave? And the answer is perhaps you don't have to do any behaving.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I could see this sometimes that all this all this internal talk about I'm doing stuff and I'm good and I'm bad is like it's just so unnecessary and so noisy, and it doesn't really have
It's
that.
disgusting.
It doesn't really have that much of an impact even. It's just all that chatter all the time, right? And things that happen, and yeah.
All right. Well, let's leave this now. I hope to hear from you again soon. Put this into your practice.
Hmm.
Part of the things to start being on guard for, because you're already on guard for feelings. So now you're going to look at, where does this stuff come from? It comes from protection of the self-preservation instinct, old programming. All right. Well, we'll see you, Ferdinand.
All
I've
right.
really enjoyed our talk today.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. See you. Bye bye.
Excellent. Okay. Bye bye.